Press Play, the Real Resilience podcast, dedicated to all things reel to reel.
Are you aware of what you've let yourself in for?
I listened to a show earlier in the week, and I was actually trying to get a pronunciation on your name, so I was listening to the...
It's Ian.
It's
Ian. I-A-I-N, and it's spelled the Scottish way.
I probably have a few more questions if we could,
Yeah,
just,
sure.
I follow you on social channels and stuff, and, you seem pretty busy.
Thanks to my guest on this podcast, Dan Labrie, for the kind words about my business. And as you will later hear, I'm not the only one who has a lot going on. But all this busy business is not through luck. As you may know, as well as this podcast, I create a number of avenues such as webinars, free downloads of reel-to-reel based docs, videos on the YouTube channel, and an Instagram presence, all with the aim of not just promoting Real Resilience, but the format in general. Now, another promotion I do is attend hi-fi shows here in the UK and deliver a presentation on reel-to-reel. I did 3 shows last year, and I've attended 1 show so far this year, the Audio Deluxe show near the Silverstone racetrack. In fact, you could hear the cars roaring around the circuit from the venue's car park. And I have 2 more shows booked for later in the year, and most interestingly, a presentation to the professional sector near the end of 2023. Via these shows, I've noticed that interest in tape has definitely increased, with more people attending my presentation and, most importantly, asking questions, which can only be a good thing. Now, a random request for reversing tape has created a new product in the Real Resilience shop. Some research turned up pre-cut lengths of self-adhesive foil, and when tested on 2 machines with different ways to reverse the tape, worked a treat. And, if peeled off, it doesn't leave a residue, which is another bonus. So, you can now find a pack of 12 strips, which is about how many manufacturers used to include with a machine back in the day, on the Real Resilience shop. A small request before we move on, and I really should ask this more as everybody else seems to who produces a podcast, and that is to follow us in your podcast app. We are on all the regular platforms, so please like, subscribe, or do whatever you need to do in your app to do that. Thanks in advance.
Subscribe to the Press Play podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your pods.
We come to my guest, Dan Labrie, for this episode of Press Play. We had such a great conversation, and once we got going, talked for well over an hour, so I've decided to split that into 2 parts. Part 2 will cover Dan's company, Myriad Magnetic, and you can find that at myriadmagnetic.com. That's all one word. But Part 1, we start with Dan's background and the way he got into the business of supporting reel-to-reel tape machines under the tutelage of the much-respected Mike Spitz of ATR Magnetics.
I attended a conference when I was still in school, and I mentioned to somebody like a mentoring program. I said, "Oh, hey, I want to work with tape machines," and they're like, "Oh, well, the handful of people I told that to, they said, well, there's only so many people you can really speak to," and I think people told me to contact like Jay McKnight at MRL, and then Mike Spitz at ATR. And so, I wrote both of them and kind of started a dialogue. And, with Mike, it was sort of like an opportunity starting to bud. And so, when I finished school, I wrote him again and said, "I'm looking for a job." And, he told me I don't have anything available. I said, "Well, can I come meet you anyway? I'm curious enough about what you do to come see your shop." And the meeting went well. And, you kind of get to see, I didn't know exactly what he did anyway, just like he was just one of the main players at the time. So, I went home and worked got like a tech job at a local studio doing caps and switches on a console. And then about 6 months later, I got word from Mike with a job offer that said, if you move down here, there's a job for you now. It wasn't not like your typical finishing university first job, but it was what I wanted to do, working with tape machines. And, he was making magnetic tape with ATR Magnetic at the time too. So it was like kind of this whole ecosystem of analog recording to be involved in. Yeah, I made the move and started working for him. And there was another technician there, and I'd never seen an ATR 100 before. I started there. It was just, I just knew that they were doing machines. And then we kind of learned the like sort of really high end specialty shop, single model specialists. It was a learning curve, but it was all, at least it wasn't too spread out. And between Mike and the other fellow, Bill, enough training to get you going, and you know what you need to do with whatever sort of month number one request that a technician would be expected to handle. Order parts or recap this card. That's it. The testing and the troubleshooting will come later once you like see many problem after problem after problem. So, but it was the really nice thing about being there was that he didn't just keep me in the service shop. He said at the time the two companies were in different buildings. So he said, okay, a couple of days this week, you're going to be doing a power supply. The other couple of days, I need you over at the tape plant, filling in, doing whatever you can to help with production. And so, you don't really think about how unique it is. But at this point, 12 years on, you look back and you think, oh, wow, I spent part of my time training, troubleshooting machines, the other time being involved in having a hand in the manufacturing process of new tape. And I like that perspective. I get to study the media and the state of the art of the media over time, in order to make a better product today. You also get to be involved in taking an old machine and making it usable for today's studio.
Well, that strikes me. You've got a greater introduction to the end-to-end from tape machine and tape than I have, because knowing about how tape is produced, the actual sort of software that these machines use is something that I should imagine a lot of engineers don't get to see on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, I know about tape. I know how it's constructed. I know how it is made, but I've never actually seen it. I've never actually, they talk about, the binder. We all talk about, the issues the binder faces on some tapes, or the issues that tape face. And we know it's oxide, and we know it's got a backing, but I've never actually seen it manufactured. And to you, have got that experience and that knowledge that many people working in with this format haven't got.
Yeah. Well, it's like a triangle, right? My deficiency would be that application side. So, where the engineer would say, oh yeah, I lined up a tape machine every day for the first 20 years of my career, and then I recorded a band for the next 20 years of my career. They're like well versed in preparing a machine, you're using equipment, dealing with an artist or production technique. And, they would say like, oh yeah, but the glue and the rust or something, just kind of generically speaking about like you said, the software, the media, that's my deficiency. But it's like sort of like the area to move into as far as trying to get the whole picture. And I think we all want the whole picture, but yeah, I'm coming at it now, doing machine preparation, not necessarily use, but then like you said, being involved in the formulation or studying formulations of tapes. And yeah, I'm happy with that.
Way back on these podcasts, I did interview Betty Spitz, who's Mike's widow. Can you tell me a little bit more than perhaps I've already gleaned from what Betty told me about ATR and about Mike and his standing in tape machines in the US?
Before he made tape or got involved in manufacturing tape, I think he was incredibly regarded for his work with ATR 100s. And I think he had full intention on producing a new tape machine at the time. We're talking 2005. And that was sort of his goal after rebuilding machines for 15 years. And then it was like pretty bizarre to read articles about quantity workers returning from a Christmas holiday in 2005 or 2006 to a sign that said plant closed. And so it's almost like this news reverberates, through a town and through an industry that there's no longer a major tape manufacturer. And I'm not even sure what the European market was doing at that time for tape manufacture, but I studied it all like in retrospect, right? I graduated from school in 2010, and I'm looking at events, in 2005, 2006, and then you see how the need for a media manufacturer to emerge sort of takes precedent over, why hardware when there's no software? So you wouldn't make a machine without the backing of new media being around. So, the direction had to be rerouted. I guess it's coincidental, but you see RMGI and ATR Magnetics pop up with new offerings around the same time. I don't know if that's unfortunate or it's a good thing, because then you have, for users in the States, you have a domestic producer, and for Europe and the rest of the world, you have a large scale producer as well, with provenance of BASF and the like. So like, he had backing from really taking care of people for 15 plus years. A lot of studio people are having their rebuilds done by Mike or upgrading their systems with him at the time. So he had a good book to build a media manufacturer off of. And, I think they hit the market in 2007 or so. I came on 3 years later, and I'm out of school, with almost like a recording degree, but I get to be involved in the chemistry, and you're around a fascinating process. That's the sales pitches that you get to create the media for a hit record to be made on. So you have your hand in it, but really, like, you don't have anything to do with that.
Don't do yourself down. Don't do yourself down. I'd say, though, for Mike, you said about 2005. That must have been quite, and he was talking about potentially creating a new machine, and indeed just creating new media. But that must have been quite a gamble, because my experience in Europe was that the BBC really phased tape out by 2000, and they were behind the curve. The recording industry had probably ditched it by about 96 or 97. And I recall I had a couple of beautiful Reeboks B77 machines lined up, all ready to go, and I sold each one for the equivalent of probably about $125 each. You couldn't give them away. This is 2001, 2002. Like, just take them away. Now we're shifting them around about sort of $800, $900, or the equivalent in the UK. I'm not entirely sure how that transfers sort of value-wise in the States. But, they have trebled and quadrupled in price. But that must have been quite a gamble then in 2005 to say, I'm going to make a new machine. Was the business there at that time?
I don't know specifically, again, like, the idea had come and gone before I even joined the team. I guess I was like graduating high school when he was kicking around that idea. So from my perspective, and doing, working for those companies for a dozen years, is that, like, you almost are in a bubble where you're so specialized on one model. It has like value and appreciation by your customer base, and there's new people coming in involved in it. So if he's 15 years on serving high-end analog, creating new plug-in modules, creating, external electronics package, the ARIA with Dave Hill, what seems like the next logical step? Well, I guess, doing your own mechanical suite, almost like we're seeing today with some of the mechanical designers that are releasing machines. So it probably wouldn't have, I don't know what this, the scale would have been as small as any other of the projects likely, but it's my understanding that was the goal at the time.
So you learnt your craft in tape and tape machines at ATR. You've now set out on your own with Myriad Magnetic. Was that as a result of Mike's passing and you felt, I've got to get a new job? Because I know obviously Bessie's still running ATR Magnetics, but is it something you just felt, I want to set my own path and start my own business offering support?
Yeah, but in a long time coming. So Mike's passing was, it was difficult, for everybody involved. It's like, you got a couple of smaller groups dealing with a great amount of change. I came on April of 2010, and he passed in the fall of 13. And so it's a short window of tutelage of me even working, under him. And, now here we are in 23, nearly 10 years on from his passing. So I stayed on board with ATR sort of, again, kind of balancing wherever one's needed, working for Betty. And initially it was like, someone's got to answer the phone. Okay, well, I have the most experience to do that. And, I think my response to every caller for the first few months was, I'll call you back. I'll look that up and I'll call you back. And, then after a while, you start to be able to answer the question on the phone, and then you find yourself taking orders and finding yourself needing to order parts, and almost there you start to plug in. And that was able to happen with ATR Services and the machine work for me. And then with ATR Magnetics, you kind of have this machine building tape. And that's sort of the role that was available after his passing, was to kind of come in, and I would be less involved in the manufacturing, but then on a daily basis, but then you're still involved in someone's got to answer the phone. And, it's to me, it's an inherently technical product. And, you have to be able to field the question, coming in phone or email. And one thing I learned about analog tape users is that they all kind of refer to the same thing very many different ways. So, like if we're talking about binder earlier, or the adhesive, or the glue, or the what have you. Everybody has a slightly different. Their teacher used a different phrase when they were coming up. So, I find myself in the role of the support person on telling people how to bias their machine, or what the equivalent tape would be, but also kind of you deal with this idea of troubleshooting it's not a problem-free media, and neither are the machines. And so you're having machine experience when trying to troubleshoot media manufacturer problems, was invaluable, but there was a need for that person there as well. So it was a great opportunity to be able to plug into his place, for both of those companies, because there was just opportunity there, and, opportunity I felt to grow. 10 years on or so, the tape manufacturing became solidified and became more reliable in the production. After you've been producing for so long, you learn what to change to improve. So those support requests go down. You create a little bit of enrichment material for the consumers to kind of educate themselves. And then I found myself, mostly doing the machine work, and I felt that I wanted to have more opportunity for growth. And I had a great working relationship with Betty. We continued it long after Mike's passing. It was just time for me to move forward and give myself an opportunity to work on, as you can see, other things behind me in the background beyond ATR 100s.
Yeah,
I want to learn other machines, and I want to support people doing all kinds of analog recording. So that's how I got here.
This is Press Play, the Real Resilience podcast, dedicated to all things reel-to-reel.
In part 2, which will be episode 25, we talk about Dan's company, Myriad Magnetic, and the many aspects of professional users' uptake, or reuptake perhaps, of the format in the recording studio. At the start of this episode, Dan wanted to know a bit more about the person he was talking to, so I outlined how I got started and where I got my experience in reel-to-reels from. If you rewind all the way back to episode 1, you'll hear a bit more about me. But a condensed version is here, and I'll leave you with that. So until the next time, let's keep it real.
Press Play.
Well, my background is the BBC. I started in 18th of January 1988 as a studio support engineer. So it's basically looking after the equipment, not pushing all the faders. I didn't do any of that. So I was based at Broadcasting House in London, which is where the National Radio Services come out from. And then I went to their Maida Vale studios, which is their music recording studios used for a lot of sessions. Probably from about the 1970s, the BBC used to put its own kit into doing those sessions, and suddenly realized about the 1980s they needed to be more commercial. So as a result, they put SSL desks in, and Studio A800 multitracks and A80 two-tracks. They always used A80 and Telefunken in their radio operations, and had been for the 1970s. So I worked there, and also worked at their outside broadcast department, which is out on the trucks, working at places like the Proms and Glastonbury Festival, looking after the equipment on the lorries. I did a lot actually of base maintenance. I very rarely went out on location. I basically looked after the equipment after it all come back from being thrown around in a muddy field or stuff like that. So tape machine wise, we had a mixture of Studio A810s, and we had a Sony PCM 3324 dash machine, and a lot of A820 multitracks as well. One of the things I did was line 4 of those up for a concert the BBC did they recorded a U2 on the when was it, New Year's Eve concert. I can't remember. It was like 1989, 1990 in Dublin, and RTE, the state broadcaster there, asked the BBC to record it because basically they had made a bigger infrastructure, and in return U2 wanted the multi-track. So I lined up 4 24-track A820 machines, which went out in a lorry, and we synced them together to make a 46-track machine. There was 118 sources coming off the stage. I mean, like, it's a 4-piece band, 118 sources. So we lined a 46-track machine up, and they just worked as tag teams, the 2 multi-tracks, to record the session.
Right.
I never knew what happened to the tapes. They never saw the light of day. I've got a recording of the concert actually on cassette, which I recorded off air. But I must have been about a week before they went out to Dublin in the base maintenance area, just lining 24-track A820s up. And boy, you can feel it in your sleep after you've done 4 of those. And then I went out to their chain. The BBC's got a chain of local radio stations, county-wide stations around England, and I worked in Cambridge, Radio Cambridgeshire, there for about 5 years, where it was Studio B67s and Studio A807s and a few PR99s as well, which they use. Their local radio is much less technically appointed than the network and the national services.
Sure.
But it's still quite fun because you got hands-on to do things. I actually pushed faders and did some recording and stuff like that. And because it's Cambridge and very sort of seat of learning with the university, I got to do roundtable discussion programs, which were eminent professors, and also local symphony orchestra, and there was a jazz festival they did. Doing the jazz festival's weird because it's like 12 guys on stage all playing different tunes. It really was like, just what am I recording here? But yeah, the BBC sent me on a music balance course, so I sort of learned how to push faders and do the artistic bit, which was really good.
Nice.
But I've done the maintenance side. So I did that till 1990s. Did studio installations, building radio stations, TV studios I built them in Norway, Spain, India, and Lebanon as well. I built studios there and stations, and did that till about 2012. I worked back at the BBC on a contract, installing their main broadcast centre in London, which is the one they're still using. And then about 2012, people started asking me about tape machines, which I'd done nothing with for 10 years. And it's just gone like that since. And then lockdown happened, and people just saying, "Can you fix this? Can you fix that?" That's where we are. That's where we are. So,
well,
a long story.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's great. It's awesome.